Good tomorrow, my sweet strangers, and welcome to Brenda's Crafty Handed World, where you can find all kinds of things, because I like to do all kinds of things. And I haven't done a sewing project in quite a long time, and I think it's time for a new one. I fell in love with Walkaway dress the minute I saw it last year, and while I was researching the project, I found out there are tons and tons of similar type dresses out there, and they all look pretty and easy. But somehow I'm drawn to this one that's called Saturday morning dress, which is basically Walkaway dress, but backwards. So in today's video we'll be recreating this lovely dress, and I really hope you join me with this project all the way till the end. So let's get started. I had a surprisingly hard time finding a white fabric for this dress. I mean, all the white cotton I could find was so thin you could actually count flowers on my bra, which I don't really wear, but that's not here or there. Finally, in about the sixth store, I was able to find a heavier blend of cotton and elastin. It was not perfect, but it was not see-through, so I grabbed it. No more time wasted on white fabric. As for the skirt, I really like the red gingham fabric, but I didn't want my skirt to look like I salvaged tablecloth. So I picked another pink pattern cotton fabric I could find and hurried back home. I started as usual by pre-washing my fabrics to pre-shrink them and stabilize the color, especially the white one. And since the sun was out and the weather was beautiful, I let them air dry outside. Then I ironed them as straight as I could, so I would be able to align the pattern to the grain properly. The next issue was this pattern. I had no idea how difficult it is to find a vintage pattern, especially when you're looking for a particular one, and I didn't want to risk the reprint. But I still have the free Walkaway dress GBSB pattern, so why not use that? It's basically the same dress, right? Just backwards with few minor adjustments. I spent a whole week fiddling with this pattern. I will not bore you with all my scribbling. Just a few key points if you are following in my tracks. After you've downloaded the pattern, printed it out, and carefully taped it together, lay a piece of pattern paper over it and trace your closest size. You don't want to mess up all this hard work you just did. Besides, you might need it again one more time. And before we jump into the brief pattern adjusting, make yourself a bodice and skirt pattern blocks so you know where the darts go and you don't have to guess. And please, test fit your pattern blocks before applying them to other projects. You'll save yourself a ton of heartbreaking moments, unlike me. It also helps to look up the original pattern layout so you know what pieces you will need. So let's dive into a brief pattern adjusting. I don't want to bore you to death. So basically what I'm doing is flipping the Walkaway dress pattern backwards. I'm using the front panel for the back and the back bodice for the front. And most importantly, changing the darts. A little tip here, when you're choosing your back panel size, take your full hip measurement, divide it by 2, and that should be the width of your pattern. I'm using my pattern blocks aligned at the waistline as a guide to trace all the new darts and the back neckline. Remember, all the helpful links are down below. Next, I extended the shoulders to make the wing sleeves and freehanded the armholes. I absolutely love the sweetheart neckline on this dress, and I'm not giving up on it. I mean, I know it sounds impossible and I can mess up the whole dress with it, but I have to try it. I'd like mine to be about 11 inches from my waist, so first I marked the tip and then freehanded the new neckline. Again, I copied the darts, matched the wing sleeves to the back panel, and freehanded the sides of the bodice, sloping them down to the waist. You might be asking now, what about the midriff? Well, after the bodice is redrafted, lay another piece of paper over it and sketch the placement and shape of the midriff. I place the top of the curve just below my sternum and follow along my ribs, sloping it down to the waist. Also, make sure not to go across the ribs because that would prevent a close fit. Then I tape the darts closed and added a seam allowance all around. And we're finally getting to the skirt. The free walkaway dress pattern calls for a full circle skirt, which I ended up using instead of the half circle skirt the original pattern called for. But for this Saturday morning dress, I think a half circle skirt will be just what it needs. I made mine 27 inches long plus seam allowance. Okay, if you have the original pattern layout, you see there are a few little pieces we are missing. And those are the neckline facings. But those are easy to make. Just trace the front and back neckline with the shoulder seams and add about 2 inches to the width. And that's it. Time to cut the fabric. Finally! I was supposed to start cutting months and months ago. But somehow all these pressing life issues and house projects got in the way, and somehow I didn't get to it. But it sure helped to keep my kitchen floor clean. I have all these little furry kitty friends, so I cannot just put fabric on the floor anytime I want. So every time I was planning to cut the fabric, I washed the floor, and then I didn't get to it. So I had to wash it next time, and I think I washed it 5 times before I actually cut the fabric. Let's start with the skirt. That seems to be the easiest thing. I folded the fabric with the selvage edges together and placed the pattern on the fold. I'm not leaving any seam allowance along the selvage edge. First of all, because we need this skirt to be a little smaller at the waist, so we have a gap opening at the back. And second, the selvage edge is already pretty much finished, so no need for too much extra work. Next, I'm cutting the back panel from my white fabric. But if you have a stretchy fabric like me, remember it needs to be stretchy from side to side, not top to bottom. I'm leaving the seam allowance everywhere except the armholes, which I'm planning to finish with bias tape. And a little tip for the shoulder seams. I found out the hard way. It's really useful to leave extra seam allowance at the shoulder seams because later when you are fitting the garment, it might be easier to just drop it down in the shoulders to fit all the darts rather than fixing all the darts. And if it's too long, you can always cut it shorter. I only had 1.3 yards of 57-inch white fabric, which was super tight to fit both the back piece and the bodice, so I suggest you get some extra. Again, I left a seam allowance only at the shoulders, neckline and waist. And also, don't forget to mark all the darts. I'm using the tracing wheel with a paper for that. Then, cut the facing from the rest of the white fabric. Just remember, keep the grain on the same direction on all the pieces, so they stretch the same way and don't pucker anywhere. Finally, I cut the midriff from the pink fabric with the seam allowance all around. So let's start sewing. I'm so behind with this project, it's impossible. There's always something more pressing at hand, like framing the windows, planting roses, taking 400-mile round trip to pick up a special furniture, just life. I sewed all the darts first, but if you're not sure about the fit, hand stitch them first for test fitting, like I did. Then sew them on the machine. But always start at the wide end of the dart, or in the middle, and go towards the tip, with the last 3 to 4 stitches going almost parallel with the edge, so the curve is as smooth as possible. I know, it's so hard to get the darts not sticking out, but this and proper ironing really helps. At this point, I pinned the midriff on the bodice, and when I was happy with its shape and placement, I just top stitched it in place. It was the easiest I could do. Of course, you could cut off the excess bodice underneath, but I didn't bother. Next, I hemmed the sides of the skirt and attach the skirt to the midriff. Don't forget to make and align the center and side marks for an even fabric distribution. The trick with the circle skirt is at your waist, so if you have uneven hemline, first check your waist before cutting it off. Remember, everyone's figure is different and a perfect circle waist doesn't fit everyone. The waistline is what makes your circle skirt ruffle right. If the skirt is too flat at some place, it needs to go up in the waist and the other way around. When I tried the dress on, I started doubting the buttons. The white between the skirts, it felt like a nurse outfit. Besides, I think that it would be too much pull on the buttons and there might be even uncomfortable to sit in. So I reconsidered the project. Looking at the original pattern booklet again, I noticed the blue dress. That's it, ties. That's what I'm going to do. So I cut two 4 inches by 24 inches strips from my pink fabric, adding about 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all along the edge. I sewed them, turned them inside out, and ironed them flat. Before attaching them though, the bias tape finishing needs to go around the armholes. This time I'm using the correct technique to sew the bias tape, not like with my walkaway dress. First, pin the open bias tape along the edge and then sew it in the crease. Also, I'm linking a very useful tip on how to end the bias tape correctly. Then wrap the tape around the edge and either top stitch it or use the invisible stitching like me to secure it in place. Then I attach the ties to the midriff from the sides. Okay, this went pretty well. The dress fits quite nicely considering my lack of professional knowledge. So now the scary part, the neckline facing. I pressed a slightly smaller, lightweight interfacing on the back of the facings. Yes, press. Don't iron, so you don't disturb the fusing process. Also, let it cool down properly before handling it. I matched the shoulder seams with the dress and sewed the front and back facing together. Don't forget to press all the seams in the right direction throughout the sewing. This one, press open. Before attaching the facing, I ran the zigzag stitch all around the outer edge to prevent fraying. Then, I pinned the facing to the dress neckline, right sides together, and sew them around the edge, very slowly, paying extra attention to the curves and the tip. The inner edge of the neckline needs to be snipped in the curves almost to the seam, so it can be turned inside out without pulling and puckering. I think the trickiest part was the understitching. The facing needs to be stitched to the seam allowance, so the facing stays folded back. Unfortunately, the snips tend to lump under the sewing foot while sewing, so watch out for that and go very slowly. And now it's easy peasy. Let's just finish the last unfinished seams, which is hem the sides of the back panel and finish the hemline on the skirt. And remember, check the waistline and adjust the ruffles before cutting off any uneven hemline. As last time, I'm using my grandma's technique. First, sew close along the bottom fold. Then, with extreme care, cut off the excess hem, about 1/8 of an inch from the seam. Make sure not to cut through your skirt. And when you're done, fold over the edge one more time and sew along the edge one more to secure the hem. And now you have a very delicately finished edge that shouldn't fray. You might also need to adjust the length of the back panel so it's not longer than the skirt itself before you hem it. And we are done! Somehow this dress seemed a lot easier than the walkaway dress, even though it also took a half a year. But that was mostly of the outside influences. Thank you very much for staying with me till the end. I couldn't do it without you. And I hope you've enjoyed this project and maybe learn something new. And I really hope you'll join me for a future adventure. Maybe framing the windows or refinishing old bathtub, who knows? I'll see you next time.
I'm not told that I'm born to leave and step behind all the things people do as if it's all of mine.